All right, everybody. It's been a few weeks, but we are back. It is another Tuesday night. It's Conversations with Commodores. And for many reasons, I've been looking forward to this conversation. But before I introduce Pat and jump into our conversation, I know we're all still basking in the glow of that beatdown in Honolulu. Several of us were there, and even though they played it in basically a junior high school stadium, the team didn't play like a junior high school team. They played like a Power 5 team, and they really, all aspects of the game were so great. But we'll put that aside for now. And I know that later this week, I believe, maybe this weekend at the Elon game, they're honoring the 100 greatest players to play in the stadium or something like that. So I know many of you who are in our group are going to be honored. So the very best to you all. Putting all that aside, I am so pleased with our guest today, a basketball and football player for the Commodores, a professional athlete, a published author. I could go on and on about his accolades, but I know he doesn't want me to, so we're going to jump right into this. We've got Pat Toomay as our guest. And Pat, it's been my pleasure getting to know you a little bit over the last many weeks, and I'm so pleased for you to have a little bit of time for us this evening. So thank you.
Yeah, this is great. I think the show is great. I love what you're doing, and it's bringing up a lot of stuff for me, I'll tell you.
Well, that's good, because I think it does for a lot of people, because you don't really think of a lot of, you may have memories, obviously, when you played and your time on campus, but it's not something you think about all the time unless you're writing a book or being in a conversation like this.
Right.
Because Pat was on campus, tell me if I'm wrong, Pat, 66 to 70, and has the distinction of being teammates, not only with Perry Wallace, but also with Watson Brown and so many other notable Commodores, and including was a key member of that 69 Bama win at home. But Pat, how does a dude from New York in the early to mid 60s even have Vanderbilt on his radar to eventually come down south in the middle of really the most turbulent civil rights time? How did Vanderbilt get on your radar?
My dad was in the service. He was an Air Force officer. We moved around the country every 3 or 4 years. And we were stationed in upstate New York. And our neighbors were from Benton, Arkansas. And our neighbors on base, Colonel Jerry J.P. Moore, had played at Vanderbilt for Red Sanders and punted. And I forget if he was an All-American or not, but his son, Jerry Moore, and my dad and we'd scrum in the backyard. And I heard about Vanderbilt from him. And that's how I knew it. And then we moved to DC, Northern Virginia area, and started getting recruited. And Bobby Cope, who was the coach at Vanderbilt, was a great recruiter. And he started showing up, and I thought, this is where Jerry Moore went, And his son went to Arkansas and was all conference, ended up playing for the Bears for a while. Mm-hmm. And then I went my path. But that's how I heard about it. And then took a recruiting trip. I had a teammate who was Kurt Chesley, I was a quarterback, believe it or not. And Kurt was the receiver, and he wasn't fast or anything, but he was shrewd and he had tremendous hands. He could catch anything, And I was heavily recruited, and I said, look, Jack Green came to the house. Black Jack Green, as we call him. And I said, look, I have a receiver who is tremendous, and he's getting no interest. And get filmed. And Jack Green said, well, get him over here, boy. And so called Kurt up, and he came over, and Jack Green felt his biceps, then looked at some film, and he said, okay, we'll take him. And I said, well, if Kurt's going, I'm going. And so we both went down. That's how I solved my problem, was overload of where to go. My family was from California. They all wanted me to go to Stanford or UCLA or SC, and I could have. There was some A&M people in DC who were recruiting for them. So it was all this, and Kurt went, and I went from quarterback to safety to linebacker in a 4-3, and Kurt went to be all SEC, and his brother went and was all SEC, and his brother went to all SEC, and then his whole family moved to Tennessee. And so I love that. And I love Kurt. He was a great guy. He's a great guy, and he was a phenomenal athlete.
That's remarkable, because every person's journey, how they got to campus, is a little bit different. But yours does. Not many people go from quarterback to safety to linebacker to defensive end. But in high school, had you reached 6'5" in high school?
Yeah.
What did you weigh coming out of high school?
Probably about 210, 215.
Because the reason why I ask, I don't know how many of you know this also about Pat. Football was not necessarily his only sport, far from it.
Right.
And I don't want to give it away, but I want you to, how did you come to terms with the coaches and whoever you were dealing with, that you were coming to Vanderbilt not just to play football, but you were going to be on the hardwood as well? How did that come to be?
Well, that was part of the, that was part of my what I wanted to do. And I wanted Kurt, to be there on the football side. And in basketball, I wanted to be able to play both sports freshman year and then choose. And so I just said, I'll come, I'll come, need Kurt down there, and I'd like to do this. And Green came over and felt Kurt's muscle, and they said, okay. So it was good, because that first year was tumultuous, and I was glad to be able to have the opportunity to get out of there. That was Jack Green's last year, which was devolving into chaos, and go in with Coach Roy Skinner, and the great basketball club was there. Now we had Perry Wallace, Godfrey Dillard. I didn't know we were integrating the SEC. I had no idea. Nobody said that. And of course, once you get there, then it turns into a whole other drama. There was a guy in high school. Our coaches. So 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I was in upstate New York at an Air Force base. The whole town was integrated. It was founded by Italians. There were Italians, blacks. Everybody lived together. Was integrated from the bottom up. Go to DC, and they're just starting integration. Okay. So our school was in the boondocks and was the new school, and Woodson, which was another new school where David Strong went. We had two African-American kids, both good, Earl Marshall and Willie Moore. Woodson David School had a couple, Skip Randon and Walter Hawkins in basketball, great players. Downtown, it was more concentrated. The school's closer to downtown. Our coaches had a scrimmage to get ready. They saw what was happening. They were from East Tennessee. They'd come up and they said, oh, this is what's going to happen. So we started in basketball, we started scrimmaging the downtown guys. No crowds, officials, clock, everything, no people, to get a sense of the game. We're playing in all black teams, and they were playing against white guys, right? And so Eastern had a guy named Louis West. Louis West was 6'4", tremendous player. We play him in the first quarter. I'm on the inside, there at the foul line. Louis is next to me. I step in to block him out. The ball hits the rim and it's coming off high. Louis puts his hand on my shoulder, goes up, jams the ball down and hits me right square in the face. And our coach calls timeout because they wanted us to get an experience like this. And we go to the huddle, and my coach looks at me and he says, what did you think of that? What are you going to do about that? In other words, you got to bring your game up. If you're going to play in this league, you got to play, and and Louis West went on to Kentucky and was a great player there, but for me, it was an indelible, unforgettable moment. So when I got to Vanderbilt and went out for the basketball team and saw that Perry could touch the top of the square, I said, I got somebody like Louis West on my team now, and we're gonna kick some ass. So that was.
I was going to say, first of all, that from the high school experience, Pat, how long did the Spalding label stay imprinted on your cheek? I'm kidding, but that's
no, you're not either, because it was that ferocious a dunk.
But that's such an invaluable experience that when you come down to the real South, out of DC, right, and now you've got Dillard and Perry Wallace on your team. And for someone who's had that life experience, it was just Tuesday to you. It was no big deal.
Right. That's
but
right.
What about the other white players who came in with you? Did they have a similar experience, or they were more?
Not that I know of. I just saw what we could be collectively. And Perry and I lived next door to each other in freshman year, and he schooled me in jazz. And we got to be we were both in the E school. We got to be close. And Godfrey was a little more brash. He was from Detroit. He had a high dribble. People would go, "Oh my God, what is that?" And we'd laugh. And so we had a nucleus there. Godfrey didn't play long. He played a year or two. But there was a screening in DC a year or so ago of a film about Perry. I'm blanking on the title. But Godfrey came.
Is it also based on the book Strong Inside?
Well, partly, but yeah. It has an independent title, and I'll think of it in a minute. But we all met in DC before a screening, and Godfrey came and his wife, and Calvin Hill, who was a great Cowboy fullback, he lived in the area. He showed up. I said, "Yeah, what?"
Former teammate of yours, Cowboy.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mark Washington, who went to Morgan State and was also with the Cowboys, he came with Calvin and with his wife, Linda. And so we're sitting there having this discussion about, what was this like? And the film very accurately captured the toughness of the whole thing.
Well, Pat, Christy Houck has a very important question for you. In basketball, were you a socks up or a socks down kind of a guy? I'm kidding. That's my question, not Christy. But he does say hello.
Christy, old Hawk.
We've also let me share. We got a bunch of folks who've rolled in. Some names you may know, some names you may not know. Darren Rothenberg, thank you, Darren. Oh, we got Ed Parrish. We got Pooh in the house. Mark Matlock, OJ Fleming, and Pat. Some of them have just rolled off, so I'm sorry I didn't get to their names. I just want to let you know who was with us so far tonight.
Great. Well, if it's just you and I, that's fine with me. I'm glad that people are showing up.
Well, Pat, you're getting to campus when right in the middle, to me, a very important time of civil rights and unrest and Vietnam. And I could go on and on and on. I wasn't there, I wasn't born quite yet, but you were there and you were in the middle of it, because being an athlete on any of those sports teams, you're automatically, regardless of the campus, right, you're thrust into the middle, not necessarily to be an activist, but you're looked on as somewhat of a leader. Frankly, that's just the way it is with athletes, in my opinion.
Right.
And you played two sports. So I want you to kind of tell us a little bit of that experience, because I know you played, at least for the first 2 years, you were on both teams and then came to football full time. But were you guys in a bubble? Were you outside of it and doing things?
It was hard to be in a bubble because of the events of the time. we had something called the Impact Symposium.
Mhm.
We had some progressive student leaders like Troy Gilliard, who, and we had John Sigenthaler, who we mentioned. Robert Kennedy came to speak in memoriam. He leaves and is killed. Martin Luther King comes. He leaves and is killed. And so this Otis Redding comes. It's his last concert. He leaves and goes north, and it's winter, and his plane crashes. So you have these events that, you try to be in a bubble, right? Especially in sports, but with this stuff flapping on the window periodically, worse and worse, it was really tough. It's really tough. And then I can't, with Perry and all that, I felt very protective about that. And I would we'd go south. When we started off playing in the north, and we go south and it got bad. And I would try to bleed off some of the pressure I was a hatchet man, basically. I played 6'5" pivot in high school, but I didn't have a long shot. I was a boards guy. And so you could feel things happening and then bleed off something by, knocking somebody out of bounds or something.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's your body language. It's the game, but it's
right.
not,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But the two things were going on, and being raised as I was, with a military ethic, you have an objective, and these are the guys you got. You take it, you meet the objective, you get the objective. It doesn't matter who they are, right? Race, creed, color, anything. It's the team, basically, trying to do that. And that's how I approached it. And I love those guys,
Just sticking with basketball for just a minute longer, when you're on the court or you're sitting on the bench, you're within feet of direct contact with the crowd.
Right.
When you're playing in Oxford, Starkville, Baton Rouge, Gainesville, Athens, Tuscaloosa, in the 66, 67 time period, you're Perry and Dillard and the team, you're breaking down barriers.
Oh, yeah. Trying to. Right.
But how do you as teammates, I know that you're trying to be as protective as you can. And I've read Andrew's book on Perry Wallace, and I've watched as much as I can. But it also takes not just one individual, it takes the team chemistry. Did that bring the team closer together? Did it divide?
Well, that was interesting because I think Andrew points out that he went to see Bobby Warren, who's a great player for Vanderbilt, Hardin, Kentucky, and he had a professional career. And Bobby had no idea what was the suffering that was going on. So it's that bubble thing again. And I think Bobby Warren was a great person too. He was ahead. Jerry Southwood, all those guys were ahead of us, and they didn't feel it the way we did on that team. Later, and most of them were graduating and going on, Snake Race and others. And so it was kind of this bubble experience for Perry, especially after Godfrey left. And his nickname was the Secret Squirrel, because he just pulled in, and he tried as best he could to negotiate the space. And I think he ended up doing a great job. But there's, when the postseason, his little senior year, nobody, and he started to talk about what the experience was like. It was very controversial with a lot of people, not with me, because, I'd seen it. We'd been in the E school together, and you could pick it up. And I had to have, I played about 8 or 9 games with them, and then I had some cartilage problems with my knee locked up. And so I had to stop, and I would listen. That was when they really went into the Deep South, and I would listen in my room on the radio, and it would be, it's heartbreaking.
I'm sure that with every fiber of your being, you wanted to be there with the team.
Yeah, I did.
I'm sure that was doubly hard for you with the injury as well.
Right, but not nearly as hard as what they had to go through.
Oh, well, certainly. Let's pivot for just a little bit, because basketball is not the only reason you're at the school. When you were being recruited and then finally came to campus, going back a little bit of that freshman semester, first semester, what position were you playing in football?
Well, I was quarterback. I was a quarterback.
And you come in at 210, 215?
Yeah, and I couldn't, so I could run.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I discovered later I had a good 40 time for somebody that size. But I played Little League baseball in the California Little Leagues, which is, you know, you're throwing curveballs and knuckleballs when you're 12, and my arm was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the hash marks were wide. So you get on that left hash mark and have to throw that out to the right. I couldn't get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew this myself. And so then they saw it and they said, okay, safety, free safety. You know, and then gradually to where I ended up, which was stand up right end in the Oklahoma defense.
Well, I was going to say, at least that first year, maybe even the second year before you went to football full time, I guess your weight didn't yo-yo that much if you're going from quarterback to safety and still playing hoops. But clearly you didn't play linebacker or defensive end still at 210, 215.
Well, back in the
body had to change.
Yeah, actually, freshman year I played basketball, and then I had the knee and focused on football then. And I was probably, I think my senior year I weighed about 218, 220 as a. But this was in the days when you know, I played at, like, in the NFL I played at 245, 250. Now you know, it's through the roof. That would be a linebacker's weight in some organization,
or even a quarterback at 6'5", 245.
Right. Cam Newton.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it was.
No, exactly. But let's step away from sports for just a minute, Pat, about your freshman, sophomore time period. There's craziness going on in society in the United States. Obviously, the war is ramping up, and the protests are soon coming on campuses. And we don't have to get into Kent State or any of those things.
Oh, well, but we had it right there in Nashville. We had.
That's what I was going to ask you, because I know that tanks were present.
Right.
But do you remember what year or when this took place?
No, I could figure it out, but there were tanks on West End. There were race riots in another part of town. And, you know, there were tanks rumbling up West End. Probably my sophomore year, junior year, so 67, 68, around in there. Yeah, it was so shocking, right? It was, you didn't know what to, you know, it's just, oh my God, you know, this is things are falling apart. You know?
Well, but was the campus, at least from your experience, was it really kind of a safe haven, or was there not that feeling necessarily because it was close to downtown?
Yeah, it was a haven in certain ways, but there was friction beginning to show on campus. They brought somebody brought Pete Seeger in for concert, who was he was a folk singer, and he was on the protest side of things, and he did a performance in Neely, and it caused a lot of people from town came, and they tried to disrupt the concert. So there was all that was going. So while it was a haven, you had that kind of stuff internally going on, which, you know, made put everybody on edge, basically, about what's happening, et cetera.
From a student's perspective, you being an 18, 19, 20-year-old playing multiple sports at a academic driven institution, there's already built-in stress with just those dynamics.
Right.
And then add the dynamics of the civil unrest. Was that added stress, or was it just,
Yeah.
I'll just deal with it, kind of a?
Well, it was added stress because Vanderbilt at that time was about 5,500 students.
Mhm.
And you were either in the School of Arts and Science or the School of Engineering. And so, from the perspective of a state school, we had 5,500 students, Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, you name it, they're talking 40 to 50,000 students on hand. And there's programs for guys who want to be a coach. There's programs for people who want to do other things, You're not stuck in this. Now Vanderbilt's, to their credit, have shifted a little bit. So you can go to Peabody and be a teacher and pick up that coursework. But back then there wasn't. It was one or the other. And the attrition was, I have some notes here. The attrition was incredible. Let's see, of 45 scholarship athletes entering school my freshman year, only 16 were around 4 years later.
Wow.
The previous year, only 6 were there from the beginning. The following year, 12. So the academic thing, now that's, Blackjack Green's recruiting and all that. What Vanderbilt did then was, my in senior year in high school, they didn't try to compete with the SEC schools. So they came to DC and they pulled 4 really good players out of there. David Strong, Bob Asher, who's an All-American, went on to play with the Bears. Kurt Chesley, myself. Kurt was all SEC, and I mentioned his family, And so they got somebody from New York City. They got somebody they had to do that to go out. And you go out like that, nobody'd heard of Vanderbilt. What is it? And then that's how they tried to compensate. In some ways it was successful our years with Pace. Bill Pace, when he came in, he was a breath of fresh air and really turned things around for us.
Yeah, I think from a recruiting standpoint, we can never compete with the big state schools. We have to go as far and wide as we can.
And that's true now. That's true now.
And guys who are just tuning in, we're talking with Pat Toomay. Pat was on campus as a basketball and football player in the late 60s and just has more life experience on and off the field than we can get to in the next 2 hours or however long we stick around.
But
I do want your opinion. My head coach was your teammate, Watson Brown.
Oh, yeah.
And Watson was a quarterback and he played baseball. He played so many other sports, but you got to play with him. I only saw him later on as an
right.
So share
what was he like as a coach?
He was a hell of an offensive coordinator, that's for sure. But this is not Bernard's conversation.
No, I know.
I don't want to get in any trouble. Pat, share with us a little bit about Watson Brown's athleticism. What was that? Because he created and played and starred with others in maybe definitely one of the more memorable wins in program history, the 69 win over Alabama 14-10. And I think Coach Bryant said after the game that it may have been the darkest period in Alabama football history or something.
Right. He said exactly that, the low point in Alabama history, and so we celebrated that one for 3 days running, it was amazing. When we had a reunion 2 years ago of that team, and it was just great. Everybody showed up and we had a fantastic time. But Watson was quick and he didn't have the classic throwing arm. We ran the triple option and he was very adept at that. And we were ready for him. They had Scott Hunter, and Pete Gillaba. They had Danny Ford, who's the later Clemson coach. He was the tackle over me. And we were just ready for him. And we were playing at home and we could smell it. And we just we completed it. And it was I played a lot of years of football, and that was one of the sweetest victories ever, ever. And as I said, for 3 days we partied.
And I think some of the members of that team still you just mention the score or the year and just a big smile comes on their face. Because that day they were world beaters. They were.
And Steve Kiner, who was an All-American linebacker for the Orange People, he came to the game, and he was later drafted by the Cowboys. And I heard this story when we were in training camp together.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, he was an obnoxious orange man, right? He came to that game, and afterwards he went down to the Alabama locker room, and he went in to see Bear Bryant, who had recruited him,
mm-hmm.
right? And Kiner goes up to Bear Bryant, if you can imagine this. He says, "Coach, it looks to me like your boys don't know what it means to wear that uniform anymore." So that, but after I got to know Steve, he would do something like that.
It just had the gumption to be able to do that.
Well, gumption's a polite word, but
well, because this is going to be a public.
No,
I do also want to welcome, let's see, Mike Healy, one of my teammates from back in the day from Charleston, is with us. Thank you, Mike. Pat, I want to stay with Vanderbilt for a little bit longer before we move on to the NFL and other endeavors. Looking back now, and I know you've reflected over many years about your time on campus, I don't know if I know how to properly ask this, because it certainly isn't easy to say, "Hey, Pat, summarize your experience." But I guess I would ask it this way. What was it that was so unique, if that's the right term, about being a Vanderbilt student or student athlete during that time period you were in school?
It was tough for the reasons stated, because we're playing in the SEC and we're not, we're 5,000 people, it's a 5,000 people in the student body. And so that was tough. But at the same time, when you could come up with an Alabama game like that, it gave us all, it justified what we felt about why to go there and play and go to school there. I like that it didn't have athletic stuff where you could do all that. When I look at it through a competitive mirror, I see these schools with 50, 40, 30,000 people, and with all the programs they have, which has been modified, thankfully, so that you can go and come out of there with a teaching degree from Peabody, however it works now. Mm-hmm. But and so it was those victories that were great. And when Bill Pace came in, things settled down, and he got it, he understood it, and he knew how to handle it in such a way. And we held our own, and that was good enough. And we had some real high spots, and that was good enough.
On the athletic side, my experience is we beat Florida at home.
Oh, did you really?
So our big victory during my term,
right,
was the Florida win. The sad reality is that we wore what may have been the ugliest yellow jerseys. Some say canary, some say banana, some say Europe colored, but that's it's not about me. But Pat, shift away from the athletics and talk about the academics side. How tough was the balance? You got to be terribly organized, particularly if you're playing multiple sports and you're not pursuing a basket weaving degree.
Right. Oh, right.
You got to be focused, but you're still a student and you want to experience and enjoy.
Right.
Talk about the academics experience for you.
Well, it was great. My father was an engineer, my brother's an engineer. So I started I said, well, I've got to be an engineer, you know, and I started off as an electrical engineer, as my dad was.
Mhm.
But then no, this isn't for me. You know, I've got the courses I took, history of art, philosophy with Dr. Locks. These things really hit me powerfully, and I could see then, oh, you know, I don't know how long I'm going to be an engineer, you know, and I worked one off season for E-Systems in Dallas, which is a big black box firm doing all kinds of secret stuff. And, you know, in college, that's interesting. During college, in summers in California, where my family moved from DC, I went to work for Aerospace Corporation, which was a civilian adjunct of and they were gaming. I had a top secret clearance, and they're gaming out nuclear exchanges. And I walked into the briefing room one day, and I was doing this and that, you know, but then this was the overview. They were gaming out nuclear exchanges with the Soviets. And I looked at the last chart, and it was genocide, you know, on the thing. And that was like a fist in the face, what was going on here. And then I had a feel for, when I got to the pros, I was struck by what was going on. So I started keeping notes. And then that ended up in a book of, you know, there's a story there. And then I switched paths. I worked one off season as an engineer, and then I got more interested in that. And I met writers, met Andrew Marinus, his father. We've known each other 25 years. And so there's been that give and take. And I found that's where I needed to be, I felt.
Just as a side note, the two art history or history of art classes that I took were by far my most interesting classes, but the hardest. I was a history major, the hardest classes that I took, but I loved every minute of it, but I struggled through it. I don't know if there's a contrast there, but anyway.
No, I think that's interesting. And we had Victor Uritzin was the art history teacher, and he had a way of making it come alive, and that really got me. It really got me. And you know, I may have met my wife in that class actually, which didn't hurt either.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, Pat, let's come through undergraduate, and your senior year is the 69 season that we briefly mentioned, the Bama year. Did you at that point, or at what point, I should ask it this way, did the NFL seem like that would be in your future? How did that evolve? Because it's so different in the last few decades than it was in the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, the draft plays a big role there. I got drafted, I mean the military draft.
Right.
We got Vietnam going on, and we got the military draft, right? And I didn't have a high number. It was a lottery. And I didn't have a high number, and I was concerned about it. And I got drafted in the middle rounds by the Cowboys as a quote project. They wanted me at 250 and it'd be a down lineman. I could run a 4.8 40, which is moving for linemen. They wanted me to weigh 250. I was 220, 218. And so they 6th round pick. And I can tell you how I started getting these cases of a supplement called Hustle that Dr. Pepper made. You drink these, you do these weights, and we want you 250, you know. And so I started doing that, and I started looking.
And is this pre-draft or post-draft?
Yeah, this is post-draft.
Okay.
I've been picked. This is what they wanted. Here, you can do it or, do it or not. So I started doing that. And then the draft became an issue. I had a high number. And then it was an interesting contradiction. The head coach of the Cowboys was Tom Landry, who was a World War II bomber pilot and who was a born-again Christian. He was heavily involved with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And then you had the people in the organization, and they had a strategy to deal with the draft that I don't think Coach Landry knew about. He may have. That was always a question for me, because what they would do is you'd get called for a draft physical, you'd send the draft board a change of address, and they'd shift it to another place. So I went from having, they said, just do what we're telling you, right? So I was in Nashville, I got notified. I gave my home address in DC. I got notified, I gave them another address in Dallas. And so, and then I saw what was happening, which was, and then I knew other players by now, and they were telling me what their process was. Some of them had to join the National Guard. But I saw that if I made the team, I wouldn't have to go to the military. It came down to that. You see that? Does that make sense?
It does.
And I'm thinking, you know, my dad, he's a general officer in the Air Force, you know,
Right.
and he's ambivalent about the Vietnam situation. He doesn't articulate it, but I'm telling him what's going on. And it's sort of, he wants me to play, you know, he wants me to go on. At the same time, there's that. And so we went back and forth, never verbally articulating what was going on. And so I made the team and didn't have to go to the Vietnam. I mean, that was the essence of it. And Cliff Harris, who was my roommate, the great All-Pro, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame soon. He went to Arkadelphia. He was from Arkadelphia, Arkansas. I went to Ouachita Baptist College. He was a free agent, you know. So about mid-season, he gets notification to go join the National Guard, which was the second tier of avoidance. So he did that. So it was, you know, the culture was in chaos with all these competing forces. In my high school, the kids who didn't go to college were gone. They were fodder. They were killed or seriously wounded. And so how do you reconcile that? It's a tough one.
You know, I can only imagine the stress of not making an NFL roster. That's one thing.
Right.
But in the middle of the Vietnam War, when you have a high, you know, if you don't have a high number, I'm either going to make this team or I got to go
right. No,
across the world.
Right. It's crazy making. Right.
And you're 20, what were you, 22, 23
yeah.
at the time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
no, yeah.
I'm sure on many levels for you personally, it had to have been a relief to know the Cowboys wanted you on their active roster from that first year. But now, at what point do you reach 245, 250 and weight? And can you look at another bottle of that hustle drink ever again?
I gained the weight by the time I went to camp, and I held my speed. And I was, you know, I was quick. I was a basketball player, and Landry's defense was unique, and it took 3 years to learn it. It was counterintuitive. Oh yeah, it was counterintuitive to everything. It wasn't, you know, tackle the man with the ball, which was the Oakland defense, right? He's got the ball,
right?
But it was keys, and you know, I could go into that, but it was totally counterintuitive, and you didn't. It was a gap. He would create gaps, and then the defense funneled the running back into a place where the middle linebacker would be, and then our job was to keep the middle line. Leroy Jordan, great Alabama. He weighed 215, and there's no middle linebacker who weighs 215.
There's no kicker right now that weighs 215, but Pat, how do you gain almost 10% more of your body weight addition and still be athletic? How did you get used to that?
I just did. I had to, I think maybe I was 245, so I had to go 25 pounds. So I hit the weight room, and people were angry at me because I didn't, well, you should have done this for us, you know. And I said, well, you never asked, you know, you wanted me to play here to play there. And then I gained the weight and the strength. And then once you get there, you, and you have one position to play, then you work on that and you find the optimum, which for me then was about 245. I just watched speed and quickness versus weight. And I wasn't going to go beyond, I wasn't going to lose one for the other. So I kept that.
The more researching I did, the more amazed I was at that. And this, I don't know how to put this properly. You were kind of the Forrest Gump of that 10-year span. And what I mean by that, and guys, if you don't know Pat's history of teammates, he goes from Roger Staubach and Tom Landry on those awesome Cowboy teams to the OJ Simpson Buffalo Bills. And we're going to come back to this, but then down to the John McKay, Selman Brothers, Steve Spurrier Bucks, to the NFL reigning champs, Ken Stabler, Matuzak, Sistrunk, John Madden, Raiders. And I don't mean to summarize your whole career in 5 seconds, but that's 10 years of spanning the country,
right,
not missing a single game.
No.
And it's just amazing to me, that football odyssey.
Right. Well, what got me into trouble with Dallas, I had trouble with that. I had trouble in Dallas reconciling the system with, and I started keeping notes.
Well, I was going to ask you this.
That was the key. This explains a lot. So I started keeping notes, and John Bibb, who was the sports editor in Nashville during that time, was a good friend of mine. And John Sigenthaler was the publisher of the paper. And after I got by Christmas time of my first year, I had some 30 pages. And so I gave him to selected family members, not my father. And as an afterthought, I sent the pages to Bibb because I knew him. I thought he'd get a kick out of them. And then unknown to me, he passed them to John Sigenthaler, who was the publisher of the paper, the Tennessean. And he sent them to a guy he knew well at W.W. Norton, the editor-in-chief, who passed them to a young editor. And then Sigenthaler didn't say this to tell me this. Suddenly I get a letter from Norton saying, is there any more? Do you have any more of this? And I thought, no, there could be. And then Star Lawrence was the editor. He was a young guy just out of Princeton, and he just saw something. And so I continued for the next 4 or 5 years and then submitted them. And they thought it was great. And then there was a book. Well, the book is what's written in the book is why I decided to leave. I played out my option. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't feel like my potential was being realized. And so I got signed by Buffalo. And that's coming off of OJ Simpson's 2,000 years season. Right.
And the name of that book that you published while still a cowboy?
The Crunch. It's called The Crunch.
And the genesis of that, was that your experiences at the time that you were going through as an active NFL player?
Yes. And most players write after they retire, but I was doing it while I was, because I was having trouble.
Come from, Pat? Where did the not the ability to write, but the desire to write?
Well, it was a I don't know. I sort of stumbled on it. It was a way I was doing this in college too. Then I situations that I couldn't get a handle on, I would write verse or something about it. And then this was a carryover from that. What I was learning from Dr. Locks and things that happened. And that, I was trying to process. It's a good way to process and not be in a welter of confusion all the time. And so that's what I was doing. It was I think the term is cognitive dissonance. I was allaying my own cognitive dissonance about this experience. And so when the book came out, I was in Buffalo, and Kurt Gowdy was talking about it on Monday night, and then the owner read it and said, "Oh my God, we can't have this around here." And so I was the defensive MVP in Buffalo and got put on the expansion list. And then I go down to Tampa, and I would have been.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is leading up to the 76 season when the Seahawks and the Buccaneers were the new franchises.
That's right. And then I go down there, and the book is published, and the owner says, "Oh my God, we can't have this here, McKay." And so then the general manager of Tampa was Ron Wolf, who had been the personnel director of the Raiders, and who later was the architect of the Brett Favre Packers. And he says, he wrote a book, so who gives a shit, you're going to Oakland. And I thought I'd died and gone to football heaven.
After being in football hell.
Absolutely. 0-14.
I was going to say, it was a defeated season.
Oh, it was, but there were some positives. I've written, I don't know if I sent you the piece, but I
did see that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, we had the Selman brother. There were positives. We had Spurrier, the greatest, it was our quarterback. We were 0-14, bound for 0-26, but it wasn't all bad. It wasn't all bad. And so then for me, Oakland was, as I said, like dying and going to football heaven. And John Madden never encountered any coach like him ever. He was, who is this guy? I was wondering. I mean, the compassion he had, he was knowledgeable about the game. You come in for practice. So I get there, I have to drive. So here's an example. I get traded to Oakland. I'm through. I have to drive from Tampa to Dallas back, right? Get my stuff. I have to get on a plane to San Francisco. I get to San Francisco. Somebody picks me up and takes me to training camp in Santa Rosa. And I walk in, and Madden says, "Now let me understand that. Wait, so you drove from Tampa to Dallas, then you got on a plane, and then you came all the way up here." He said, "You must be exhausted." Now just think about a head coach saying that to you ever. And I went, "Well, yeah, I'm pretty beat." He said, take 2 or 3 days off, and when you feel good, come on out." I said, "What?" Because anywhere else it's that never happens.
No, he was a real players coach, it sounds like.
And I said, "Who is this guy? Where did he come from? How?" And then I've written about that for ESPN too, where he came from, and his behavior in the Stingley game when Darryl Stingley was paralyzed tragically was beyond anything I've ever seen. He went to the hospital with him. He was there all the time. He walked him all the way through to the point where he could become, and I just said, this guy is a special guy. Now later when you see him on TV, how bombastic he was and all that, that's all kind of a show, but in his heart, he was like the biggest heart ever in football, in my experience.
All right, I have a trivia question for you, Pat, and you may be the only one who can answer this.
Christy Haupt might be able to answer it.
I don't know, this may push Christy. The University of Tampa, Vanderbilt University, and the University of Mars. What does that have in common with the Oakland Raiders?
Well, the University of Mars is Otis Sistrunk, who went to the University of Mars. Now, I can tell a story. I want to tell a story about Otis. Tampa is Matusak. What was the third one?
Vanderbilt University.
Oh.
In other words,
Christy
Haupt, the defensive line for at least one of those seasons for the Oakland Raiders. That's phenomenal that you guys all played together. Such personalities, such athletes. Amazing. Give us this drunk story.
Otis was no hair, but we were linemen together. He weighed about 260. And when I got there, we bonded immediately. And he said, look, use my car. I said, oh, are you kidding? He said, no, use my car. I can get other transportation. So he's got a Cadillac Seville, blue. I said, truck, are you sure you want to do this? And he said, yeah. So we get into the preseason and they're playing me at left end. We start the preseason and I said, Otis, I'm a right end, you're all hardwired with that stuff. And he said, well, let's switch. I said, you mean us, we just take care of the problem ourselves? He said, yeah, I like to play left side and you can play right. And I said, we don't have to tell the coaches or anything? And he says, no, we'll just switch. And we switch and I get 3 sacks in a preseason game. And then the coaches say, well, let's see, we got, you're playing the right side. We were playing you on the left side because, I said, well, you're going to argue with the sack total? And they said, no, we're going with this. And I led the conference in sacks that year because of Otis Sistrunk, sweetest guy in the world, no college, but his heart is like the big outdoors.
That's being a teammate. Really, any team, any sport, doesn't matter. Teammates see things in other teammates that the outside world never gets to see.
Right.
Because a lot of that is just inside the locker room or in the privacy of just the team dynamics.
That's right. I think that's very true. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's whether you played at Vanderbilt or Bethune-Cookman or Iowa City Community, it doesn't matter to me where you played. When you play team sports, Pat, you have such a bond with those men and women, whoever was on your team.
Right.
And I suspect like some of the names that you brought up, whether they were Vanderbilt guys or in the pros, if you were to see them, you get a big smile on your face.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Steve Spurrier, I did see him at a Vanderbilt game as coach. And we talked about it. I said, because he had he just nearly got killed that year, But he and his wife, Jerry, they would have get-togethers and through the season. And in a situation like that, and maybe I mentioned it, but it becomes a 3-foot world. People are watching. And the worst, even in the worst season there is, people are watching. And so you play your position to the best of your ability, no matter what's going on. Because you can't control if the outside linebacker is 180 pounds and off the streets of Walk with no experience. You can't control that, but you can you can do your responsibility and set up the play and maybe make a few yourself. And that's what tried to school Leroy Selman with that the whole time through. His brother Dewey was there too and said, look, just walk through it. Because you talk about a gifted guy. He was a gifted player and a big heart too.
You know what you're describing, Pat, and I hate to ever attribute the Patriots anything because I'm not a fan, but they've always had the mantra, maybe it's Belichick, maybe it was Brady or them together, do your job was the motto.
Right.
And it's just being a professional is what
That's right.
like. But guys, with Pat playing on 4 teams in those 10 years, the game 6 degrees of separation with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
I suspect there's like 3 degrees of separation with Pat Toomay during the 70s during your time.
Yeah.
Pat, I hope you've got a little more time because I have so many more topics to go over. Are you good with time for right now?
Fine.
You wrote a second book. I just finished it. Any given Sunday. Share with the folks what was the premise of that book.
Well, this is interesting, and so that book it's about the prospect of on any given Sunday of something being up with the game, that it's fixed in some way or another. And part of the book, the play that I use in that book, right, happened. It was a play from a Buffalo game, Buffalo in Miami. That play exactly as it happened occurred, and it was crazy. I was called for brushing an official, and it flipped the whole game. And of course, there's no such call as brushing an official. It was made up out of thin air. But what happened was 15 years later, when Oliver Stone is making his football film, Any Given Sunday, I ended up getting a bit part in it by accident. In other words, they thought they didn't know my novel existed. And anyway, I go down to Miami for a bit part in this film, and there's Y.A. Tittle and there's Jim Brown. And they made me, Y.A. Tittle was the head coach of a team, and then Jim Brown was another coach. But the lunches and the conversations in the trailer park were unbelievable.
Oh, wow, I bet.
And so we go through the filming, and then it's in the Orange Bowl, which is where the play my novel was based on was happened. And they line us up on the spot where the play occurred that inspired the novel, whose title they're using for this movie. And when I see this, I'm having flashbacks. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the same exact spot. And so I stopped it. I said, no, I was YA's assistant. I was defense. So I stopped it, and I said to Oliver Stone, I said, you realize the sentence I just said? And he stared at me for a long time, then turned and walked away. And when I got home, I wrote a piece about it, made Best American Sports Writing. So it was one of those moments, football moments, that you couldn't make up.
It sounded like they brought you in because they didn't want any copyright or
that's true.
trademark issues.
That's true. That's right. That's right. And I said,
did you read the fine print about that when you signed?
Yeah. Well, no, they did all that, right? The producer.
Yeah, I assume. Some have likened the crunch to being maybe the NFL version of Jim Bouton's Spoiled 4. Is there a parallel in your mind?
I think, there is a bit, but it's different. But it's football instead of baseball, and I don't think there were. I think he had more foils in the humor department than we did. It was different, but I think it was in that trail a bit.
Pat, obviously, mother time, father time is undefeated from an athlete's standpoint.
From anybody's standpoint.
From anybody's standpoint. Thank you. You're so correct. But looking from the lens of an athlete, I don't know if many of us get to quit the game we love, whatever it is, on our own terms.
Right.
You being a professional athlete for 10 years is such a small percentage of even those who make it to the top level.
Yeah.
How and when was the writing on the wall, so to speak, for you to now move on from the NFL to your next career?
Well, it was injuries, basically. I couldn't come back from a knee injury.
Was it the same knee from Vanderbilt?
Well, no, it was the other one. So I've had 3 knee surgeries. And by that time, I was told there's no cartilage, there's no ligaments, are all stretched. And so a knee replacement is but I haven't done that yet. I try to keep muscles, thigh, straight-legged deadlifts and stuff like that, because I'm too old. I'm old. I'm 73, and I don't know if I want to spend a year rehabbing. I can't run or anything, but I can get around and do stuff. We have a big place here, and I can do all the work that's needed here. And I walk. And I'm going to go, I think one of my Vandy teammates is looking at a replacement. And the thought of it, I just thought, not yet. If it goes, then I'll do it. If it doesn't. And my son, he's a physician, and we went out for a hike up in Canyonlands, and we got lost, and we were out there for 13 hours. And at the end of it, when we finally made it back to where we were supposed to be, he said, "Dad, I take it back," because he's been agitating that I get a knee replacement. He said, "If you could do that, you're right. You don't need a knee replacement yet." So that's where I'm sitting.
And the physical injuries are really one thing, but I often believe that it's the mental aspect of being away from your sport, your team, your regiment, coming back to being a civilian, so to speak.
Right.
A lot of pro athletes don't have plan B.
Right.
Because they've only focused on plan A.
Right.
But you being an author and so many more things that bring you joy in life, was that transition a tough one? Was there bumps in the road, or was it pretty smooth from that aspect?
Well, no, I just went from one moment to the next. In other words, I felt like I had to track the stuff that was going on. I did, and there was a book. But the bestsellers you read about, that's not the book business. The book business is, I didn't make enough money to retire on that book. David Marinus has written 15. He's found a way, right? But what I found was I didn't have the facility. So I've met a lot of A-list, big time writers, and I've sat with them, and I've seen the facility that they have. And it's just like sports. And they all wanted to play sports. They all wanted to be athletes. And then I'm sitting here wanting to write, and I see the facility, and it's the same facility. It's the same facility we feel when we watch these guys. It's the same thing. And just as they don't appreciate their own genius, it's on both sides of the fence. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Yeah.
And the facility these guys have with language is beyond the beyond. They can do 50 drafts of something until they get without, boom, just like you and I would, run around the track, right? And I said, David, do you realize what's happening here? And so, it seems to be that it's a good thing to appreciate your own gifts, and don't always be going to the next field of green grass.
No, you're so right. It's just like what you just said. Rock stars want to be athletes. Athletes want to be rock stars, and all of this. But appreciate what you're in and what you're doing and accomplishing in your own strengths.
Yeah, right.
And I'm gonna kind of move around a little bit on our last few topics, but Christy reminded me I have to ask about Two's Tunes. Can we set that into perspective and tell us about its greatness?
Well, being in a military family, we moved around a lot. And after my freshman year, my dad got transferred from Northern Virginia, DC to Southern California. So we're a California family anyway. My dad was from there. I was born out there. But when I get out there after freshman year, there's something going on musically that's unbelievable. And it's happening right there. It's Sunset Strip. There's Jim Morrison is in this nightclub, and he's the son of a military guy. He's the son of a Navy guy. I'm thinking, what Janis Joplin showed, Hendrix. Then what is this, And so I started accumulating those records, and because all these events were happening out there. The music was like mind blowing to me. And so I got a decent stereo, drove back to campus, and none of it hadn't hit there yet. And so every Thursday night, or whenever hump day was, we would have tunes. We'd go to the hurry back, we'd get some beer, and then I just start playing these songs, this music, and everybody was floored. We'd have 20 people, drinking and singing and doing and it was it was all of that. And so that was just something that evolved, and we did it once a week, without fail. And that
clearly it was.
And then the music started drifting in, and it wasn't so alien anymore, but everybody loved it anyway. So it was that was a lot of fun.
Well, I was going to say, if Christy remembers it from back in the day, to bring it up, it was a positive vibe, a positive memory for you guys. But you mentioned, where was the hurry back?
Oh, it was so we were in one of the first two towers.
Yeah.
And it was 2 blocks over
Mm-hmm.
on Church Street. I don't know. It was just a little package store. Homer was and then there was a bar up the street called the Locker Room, just up there. So the hurry back, you could go get beer and bring it back, or the Locker Room.
It sounds like it was near Exit In. I don't know when Exit In was.
No. These were Exit In was in a different part of town.
Okay.
Sort of out toward
maybe Elliston. I'm getting some of the streets mixed up.
Yeah, I am too. It was very close to campus, and it was over a couple streets, and it was just a funky place.
Awesome. Well, the towers, rest in peace. They're all down now, and I don't know if you've been to campus or seen what's going on campus, but it's a whole new world over there. A lot of where the fraternity.
What is where the towers were? What's there?
I think they're in the process of building it now. But at least where that steak and egg, not too far from that area.
The Crystal.
That's a whole, Dwayne, if you're on, you'll have to help me out, but it's its own mini campus quad and a Harry Potter like Hogwarts 15-story building right in the middle. Not as big as the towers were.
Right.
But it's a whole new experience for those kids. And I'm not doing it justice by describing it.
That's amazing.
But what is amazing is we're 70 minutes in, and I feel like I haven't touched on anything. but there is a current project that I know you're working on that's very important to you. And I want to talk about that too. So if you don't mind, share with us the current project.
Well, John Sigenthaler, who's a legendary figure in Nashville, who's editor of the Tennessean and then publisher. And he was in the Kennedy Justice Department. He got his neck broken down in Montgomery. He was a huge civil rights guy. He was an attorney by trade. And so he has this whole background in that world. But he's a polymath. He's a genius, and he loves books. And for 40 years, from 71 till a few years ago, he had a program on Nashville Public TV that ran regionally called A Word on Words, in which he interviewed authors about their books. And when I came, he got The Crunch published. And so when the novel was published, he had me on the program. And then we were able to talk about it. And I met Fry Gilliard, or Gilliard, as I would say. He was a year ahead of me, but very active in student government. And he had similar experiences with Sigenthaler, who had him take his seat. He's a kid, he's a student, He has him take his seat in a limo to go pick up somebody at the airport, Sigenthaler says to him. And here is this kid, right? He goes out, and out comes John Glenn and the astronaut, and Martin Luther King. And then Fry is forced to make conversation with these two icons in the 40-minute ride back to campus. And this is the kind of thing Siegenthaler would do. And so Fry and I got together on this. We didn't know each other well in school at all. I knew him. He was a student, he was high up in the student hierarchy of stuff. He was in charge of the impact symposiums and stuff like that. I knew who he was, but we've hooked up on this subject, and we've gone through the 900 interviews, and we've called maybe 24 of what we feel are the best and put them in a book called A Word on Words that'll be published by Vanderbilt University Press soon, in the next year. And the subtitle is The Depth, Breadth, and Passion of John Siegenthaler. So he did these interviews, and he read every nobody, and I've been on the circuit, nobody read like he did. Nobody read, and unbelievable. So you have these very different people, famous writers that people will know when they look at the table of contents, and Nikki Giovanni, Fry's in there, I'm in there, but Waylon Jennings, on and on and on, and they're just fantastic conversations.
What a treasure trove.
Oh yeah.
I suspect you could do, I don't give you a headache, but you could probably do volumes 3, 4, and 5, just with over 900 to choose from. But what an incredible endeavor. Yeah. And I know you're looking very much forward to that coming out.
And the afterword is written by Andrew Marinus, who's a writer in residence at Vanderbilt now. And he had written his Perry Wallace book and was scheduled to go on the program, and John Siegenthaler passed. And so he writes the afterword. So he brings it up to date from 1970 all the way up to Perry and that book and what's going on then. And so we're very excited about it, and so is the press, and we're looking forward to it. There's 4 or 5 sports things in there that people know. Grantland Rice, who was the great sports writer.
Sure.
So it's this is what I've been doing in the pandemic.
Well, as soon as it gets published, we'll put a link in the football group so you guys.
Oh, that'll be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pat, as I said earlier, I could talk with you for the next 3 hours and still not be finished, but I want to be respectful of your time and the folks watching. So I can't thank you enough for spending time and sharing some of your incredible life experiences with us.
No, it's been my pleasure, and I enjoy the interviews. I've been watching, and somebody comes on who's I really enjoy what you're doing, and I'm sure you'll package this in some way at some point.
Well, for now, it'll be in our Facebook group. We'll put it up on YouTube. Right. We may have to have Pat back, because I know we haven't talked about name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal, the modern game. There's so many things, but I'm going to be respectful. We're going to pause for now, but Pat, thank you again so much. It's been my pleasure tonight. So thank you.
No, mine too. Appreciate it very much.
If you would stick around even after I sign off, I got something to share with you. But guys, keep coming back. I've got Commodores lined up. We're going to get it through this year. So thank you for sticking around. We got Elon next Saturday night at 6 p.m. at home. They're going to be a big celebration, all kind of good stuff going on. If you haven't seen the photos from this week about the new turf on the stadium, not to mention the new naming rights, First Bank is going to be the new stadium name with a big deal there. Check it out. You guys, anchor down.